Hello, this is Dennis Siler of Siler Woodworks and also Siler Guitars. I'm in the shop today, and I've gotten a lot of questions lately on my site and other places, people asking me about woods and also asking me about what is involved in having a guitar built for you. The vast majority of the guitars that I build are built to custom order. In other words, I don't just have a stock of guitars built hanging on the wall like a typical retail music store does. I talk to individuals, ask them what they want, and work with them to come up with their dream guitar, and then I produce it. So the first thing that we talk about when I'm working with someone about a guitar is what kind of woods that they want. So today I'm going to start with the driving force behind the tone of every guitar, and that's the top, the tone woods of the top. And tone wood is an expression you'll hear used a lot by guitar builders. Not all woods sound great. Most woods have some sort of sound. If you were, when you were a kid, if you took a piece of sticks and clicked them together, you noticed, hey, these make neat sounds. Maybe you had a xylophone when you were a kid, or maybe you played a marimba in high school or something. And so you know that certain pieces of wood will really, really ring, others not so much. When we're looking for tone woods in guitars, we're looking for things that will resonate well, and particularly in the top woods. So I'm going to talk a little bit about top tone woods today. I'm going to show you some examples of the different kinds of wood and what each one of them would bring to a guitar, and that'll sort of get you started on understanding what would be involved in having a guitar made for you, custom built. So the first one I want to look at is called West Coast cedar. There are lots of trees in the United States that go by the name of cedar. Here in Arkansas and the southwestern United States, we have something called red cedar, but it's not West Coast red cedar. This tree that we call red cedar around here, they're everywhere in this particular area of Arkansas, isn't really a cedar tree. It's a juniper tree. And the wood is beautiful. It's dark red. It's very aromatic. People make cedar chests and cedar closets out of it, but it's so full of knots, it is really not suitable for a tone wood for building guitars. West Coast cedar, on the other hand, is a very large conifer. It has very straight grain in the larger trees after it gets up to be 150, 200 years old and older, and it gets much older than that. It makes a good guitar depending on where it grew. So here's an example of West Coast cedar. And if you look at it, maybe the first thing you'll notice is there's sort of a tan color. It is a beautiful color, and it's also, this particular piece has extremely tight grain. There are more than 30 lines per inch on this, and they're all perfectly straight. They look almost like they were drawn by a draftsman. So there's an example, and when you're looking at wood, you want it quarter sawn. And what that means, I mean, you can look up on different wood sawing videos that you'll find on YouTube, but the easiest way to say it is this grain is exactly vertical. So when you look at the front face, all the grain lines run straight up and down. And if you look at the end, I hope you can see that, all the grain lines run very close to 90 degrees. For guitars, we want something that runs as close to 90 degrees as possible. 89 is not quite as good as 90. We want it as close as possible. And this is what the piece of wood would look like if you split it out of a log. It splits along the lines of weakness and leaves the strong planes. So that's what we've got with this piece of West Coast cedar. Now, cedar looks good. It is very stiff and lightweight, which is what you want for a tone wood. And it also sounds good. So if I were to take this and tap it, and I'm going to do that now. There's an initial tone when I strike it, and then it rings for a moment afterward. That's called the tap tone. And this wood does do that. It makes very nice sounding guitars. Here is a guitar in process that has a West Coast cedar top. And you'll notice this particular one also has Indian rosewood back and sides. It has maple binding and a wooden herringbone purfling that you would expect to see. And the sound hole rosette on this one is pearl. If I sit this up, I'm gonna put my camera down so that you can see it better. Camera right here, and hopefully you can see this. So if I pick this up, the top is going to vibrate just like that plate did when I thumped it earlier. But this also has a resonating cavity, the body of the guitar. So this will give you an idea what the cedar guitar will sound like, or how much volume you can get out of it. So it sounds a bit like a drum. And that's what you want. You want something that sounds really, really good. You want a lot of musical tones coming, different pitches coming from different parts of the top. And each one of those reinforces and resonates the sound of the strings as their energy passes through the saddle, through the bridge, into the bracing of the guitar, bounces off the back, and comes out the sound hole. So all those things happen simultaneously, and it's actually even a little bit more complicated than that, but you get the idea. So this is a West Coast cedar top. Another very popular wood, and one that's being used a lot, and has been used for quite a few years, is Sitka spruce. Sitka spruce is definitely the go-to wood for most American-made, particularly factory-made guitars, since the mid-1940s and beyond. And we'll talk for a little later about what happened before Sitka. But Sitka is a very large conifer. It grows all over the northern part of North America. It grows at high altitudes. The high altitude wood tends to have a little bit tighter grain, which is what you want. Here's a piece of a top made of Sitka. This is a particularly interesting piece of top, because I hope you can see that. Yeah, I think you probably can. This is curly Sitka. So not only is it quarter sawn and straight grained in this direction, but the grain actually runs in a wavy pattern, and so you get this beautiful three-dimensional wave pattern, and under finish it's much stronger. And so this will give you an idea of what this one sounds like. It's a little hard to hear it. You hear the pitch of that, and then you compare it to the pitch of that. So there's about a half step between those two. This again is very stiff. I mean, this is a thin piece of wood, less than 1/8 of an inch thick, and yet it takes a good deal of force to bend it, and it's going to get thinner than that when we make it into a guitar. Sitka, as I said, is the go-to, and a large number of guitars are still built with Sitka tops. It's reliable. You know what to expect with it. You can work with it and get a great sounding guitar. As a matter of fact, my son is building a guitar. Let me grab it. It's right here. Here we go. And this guitar is a Sitka top, and of all things, most people have never seen this before, white oak back and sides. So this is quarter sawn white oak, very straight grained, and you can see the medullary rays, the sort of tiger striping that goes here. And it's also curly, so you can see that curly figure, much like the piece of curly Sitka that I just had. This top is as a Sitka spruce top. You can see it has a creamy white color. It's not as tan, or there are no reddish tones like the West Coast cedar. And here's a little bit of a sample of the sound of it. So you see a nice variety of musical tones coming out of the top of it. Makes a great guitar, and there are millions of guitars out there made of Sitka spruce. It's tried and true. It's been around a long time, and it's going to be around for a lot longer. Now, the slightly rarer woods. And I mentioned that Sitka has been used since about the mid-1940s and on, but before that there was another kind of wood used. And I know some of you out there are shouting it out right now. Adirondack! Yes. Adirondack spruce is Picea rubens. Was the most common guitar top wood before World War II. That's what those great pre-war Holy Grail guitars are made out of, particularly the pre-war Martins, made before World War II. They were made out of Adirondack spruce. Adirondack spruce grows in North America. It was most common in like up into Maine, British Columbia, into Canada. Down as far as the upper altitudes of the Appalachian Mountains. And what happened to it? Well, when the war broke out, a lot of the Adirondack spruce went to the war effort. It was logged out in mass quantities, and it was used to build spars and pieces for gliders and who knows what else. And so those old growth trees were pretty much logged out. That's why the manufacturers switched to Sitka. So two things brought about the end of that, what we think of now as sort of the pre-war Martin magic era. One of them was the Adirondack spruce was gone. It has the highest stiffness to weight ratio of any wood. And it has the highest speed of sound along the grain of any wood. So it is tailor-made to build, no pun on the Taylor Guitar Company. It's tailor-made to build the best sounding guitars. And so here's a piece of Adirondack spruce. And it looks a lot like the Sitka spruce. It looks quite a bit like the Sitka spruce, except it's not really as pretty. So if you look very closely at this, you'll notice it. There's a dark line right here. There's a gosh awful knot right up here. Just barely falls off the pattern that's been drawn on so that I can see what that falls into. And the grain is a little uneven. If I look at the end of the piece, it's not quite as vertical. Actually, this one is pretty good. This one is vertical. This is nice. And when I tap it, this is too thick, by the way. This will be thickness by at least a third. At least a third of this will be removed before it's made into a guitar. But here's the tap tone. There we go. There's a musical tone. So you can hear that sort of musical high-pitched ring coming off of it. And I can hear 2 or 3 other overtones over the fundamental that are not going to be picked up by the cell phone. So this is an Adirondack top. I'll put the two halves together so that you get an idea. So there are going to be some dark lines on this guitar. If I put it together like this, the lines might fall on the outside. Here I've got a pattern drawn on the back, but it's not as pretty, if you want to say it that way, as the Sitka guitars, but it sounds great. And so if all other things being the same, you can often get great sound out of Adirondack. It's not a magic wand. It's just a tree. So if if your building is ham-fisted and clumsy, if you leave the top too thick or if you take it too thin, if you don't tune the braces correctly, you're still not going to have a great guitar, even if it's made out of a great piece of wood. So this is Adirondack spruce. And now there's one other thing that I want to show you, and this has been the very popular thing for builders to go to lately. This is also Adirondack spruce, but this is torrefied Adirondack spruce. So torrefaction is a process by which the wood is heated in a vacuum. So if you heated this as high as they do in a torrefaction kiln without putting it in a vacuum, it would burst into flames. Anybody who's ever read Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451 knows that at 451 degrees, paper bursts into flames. Well, so does wood, because paper is made of wood. So this is heated up that high in a vacuum. And the idea is they drive as much of the moisture out as possible. Well, that's understandable. Any kiln drying process is going to drive moisture out, but they do something else. They oxidize the resins that are in this wood. Now, if you've been around conifers, you know there's a lot of resin in conifer trees. Anytime you skin up a pine tree or any other kind of conifer, you'll get this sticky resin that comes out, and that resin lasts in the wood for years. After the passage of time, that slowly oxidizes and the wood gets harder. Now, there's something that I discovered back a few years ago doing repair work on older guitars that surprised me. I could take a fairly thick piece of new Adirondack spruce, something that looks like this, and I can shine a light through it, and it looks like a lampshade. The light goes all the way through. In fact, you can put a bright light inside a guitar and see where all the braces are, just like taking an X-ray. But if you take that same guitar and you wait 50, 60, 70 years, even though the top is slightly thinner, because they do tend to shrink even more over time, very slightly, put the same brightness of light inside the guitar, light that no longer passes through it. So this, over time, Adirondack spruce and all other spruces and all other topwoods change, and they slowly dry out more. You can tell when you look at this piece of wood that it's been through something, because here's another piece of Adirondack. Look at the difference in color. This is darker. Look at an old Martin. Those guitars were nearly white on top when they were first made. The tops were nearly white. Now they look like pumpkin pie. So what's happened is that the wood, and to a certain extent the finish, over time, over exposure to air, oxygen in other words, and light, they've darkened. And this happens very fast. So the process of torrefaction is an attempt to age wood rapidly. So what you have is a brand new top that sounds like an old guitar top. And I have to admit, I was pretty skeptical, but from what I've seen, there's something to it. This really does feel and sound like an older top. It has a nice musical ringtone. Hear the difference in those two tones. It's not great grain. I mean, that's very wide, but it sounds great, and it looks like an old guitar because it's made out of the same kind of wood and it's the same color. So, torrefaction, possibly a way to age the wood. Now, does that make all the difference in the world in your guitar? If I make two guitars and I get the wood from the same trees and right next to each other, so it's as close as it can get, there's still going to be some minor differences. And then I put that wood, I put half of it into a torrefaction process and bring it out, and I build the guitars exactly the same. Will there be a difference? Well, there's some evidence to suggest that there is. It's very slight. So, like Robert O'Brien says, and by the way, if you haven't checked out Robert O'Brien's page, please do. Robert O'Brien's a great luthier and an even better lutherie teacher. And like Robert O'Brien says, the process of building guitars is it's 1,000 tiny little things. And this will give you 2%, this will give you 5%, this will give you a 1.5%. But if you put all those things together, suddenly you've got a guitar that's appreciably better than it would have been. So, things that help: the type of finish, the amount of finish, the type of wood, the quality of the wood, definitely the thickness of the wood, whether or not that top was carefully tuned, and we want to tune the braces. So these are all things to think about. So I hope that this has given you something to think about, and if you have any questions about Tonewood, I'll be glad to try and answer them for you or point you in a direction where I can. I think at some point we'll talk about backs and sides. They also have an impact in the sound of the guitar, nowhere near as much as the top, but they do have an impact. And this is the beginning of a build-along process that I'm going to be doing. So I'm going to do a step-by-step build of a new guitar. This is going to be a little bit unusual for me because I don't build a lot of dreadnought guitars. I find them to be a little bit too bass heavy. Most of my players are finger pickers, and they want a nice balanced guitar. But occasionally you want somebody who wants the kind of volume that you can drive a banjo player off the stage with. And having been a banjo player, I can tell you there are a lot of people who'd like to do that. So I'm going to build this for a client and a friend, a dreadnought guitar. It's going to have an Adirondack, a torrefied Adirondack top. In fact, it's going to have this torrefied Adirondack top. And it's also going to have mahogany back and sides. So I've got the mahogany set right here, and I want to just quickly say a word about it because mahogany is another wood that is sometimes used as a top wood. You can actually build the entire guitar box out of mahogany. In fact, you can build the box and the neck out of mahogany and just have a rosewood or ebony fingerboard and bridge. Everything else on the guitar is mahogany, and it's been done. So this is not going to be used as a top. This is going to be a part of the back and sides of the guitar that I've just mentioned. But you can tell that it does have a tap tone. It's very high. It's also very thick right now. That tone will come down as I thickness it. Just doesn't ring like the conifers do. But this particular guitar that I'm building in, it's a dreadnought. It's a torrefied Adirondack top. It is a Honduran mahogany back and sides. And this isn't just any mahogany. This mahogany came from a river in Belize. Many years ago, the area around the Belize River was logged out by British logging companies. This wood was one of the logs that didn't make it all the way to the end of the river. It got waterlogged and sank to the bottom. And it sat there for 100 to 150 years. It's a little bit hard to tell how long it was there. So this wood's been underwater for over a century. And it was found by a company called Greener Lumber. It's up in Missouri. I met the president of Greener Lumber. His name's Rich Petty, not that Rich Petty. And he came and did a talk to a group of mine, and I got this top and back, this back and side set from him. And I've been hanging on to it. And when my friend said, "I want something like an old D18," I thought 18 means mahogany. So I'm going to give you a horrified top and a sinker mahogany back inside. So sinker mahogany came from the bottom of the river, and we're going to see if that makes any difference in the sound of the guitar. So stay tuned. The next video, I'm probably going to be showing joining the top and back plates for this guitar, because that's the first step that I do. I join up the top and back plates, I work on the sides, and then I start building the box. So that's where we're headed. Thank you for listening all the way through. Thank you for your interest. And again, if there's anything that I can do, answering questions, or if you have questions about having a custom guitar built of any kind, I'd be glad to talk to you about that. It doesn't cost a penny to ask. It doesn't cost a penny to get an estimate. And I never go over my estimates. So just something to think about. Again, thank you. If you learned something, or if you got anything good out of this video, think about subscribing. Love to have you as a subscriber, and keep hanging in there.